Carolyn Mazloomi is a fiber artist, aeronautical engineer, historian, and master quilter. And this Ohio Heritage Fellow is a strong advocate for the preservation of quilt making in the African American community.
A self-taught master quilter, Carolyn Mazloomi's first quilting attempts didn't quite live up to her own critical eye.
Initially, when I started quilting, my quilts were very traditional patchwork quilts. And when I made these quilts, the angles never met. The corners never met. They were terrible. And for an engineer, it's bad when the lines don't meet, you can't get a straight line together. This is why I started making applique or collaged quilts. I told my husband I was going to start making quilts, and I wanted to make this a vocation. And he says, well, nobody's gonna be interested in buying quilts. Finito.
20 years later, Carolyn's quilts have been exhibited all over the world and are found in prominent museum collections like the Smithsonian. Needless to say, her quilts are in demand. So just what makes Carolyn's quilts so special?
I like telling stories. Stories are very important to me. Most of the quilts that I make deal with the status of women or deal with music, because I love music, especially jazz. But more so for me, I like telling the stories of women around the world, not just women here, but women around the world.
Kind of came to know Carolyn's work about 3 years ago when I saw one of her quilts at a gallery, and I ended up getting it because my partner loved the subject, Billie Holiday, and realized that, my God, she's like one of the greatest female quilting artists in the world.
One of my favorite quilts is Strange Fruit. This quilt deals with Billie Holiday and her singing the song Strange Fruit, which really was an anthem. It was the consummate protest song, Strange Fruit. So I chose to depict that in a quilt. About a decade ago, there was a book written about lynching, and this is what the song Strange Fruit addresses: lynching in this country.
When Carolyn first started quilting, she realized as she went to quilt exhibits, quilt shows, she never saw any African American quilters. She did not see African American quilts. And then she began to understand that African American quilt makers were not joining the guilds, the quilt guilds that had been set up by white quilters for mainstream art production. So she realized that African American quilters needed their own organization and needed their own context in which to produce their very distinctive art.
This prompted Carolyn to found the Women of Color Quilters Network.
I think the most important thing that Carolyn has done for African American quilters, both here in Ohio and in the country and around the world, is to found the organization, Women of Color Quilters Network. She began this organization in the mid-1980s when it only had 8 or 10 members. Today it has 1,700 members, and it is a major support group for African American quilters. It gives them a place to be creative, a connection through which they can exchange ideas.
We have a chapter here of the Women of Color Quilters Network here in Ohio. And it's just like all the other chapters. We quilt together. We present at museums and galleries around the state and around the nation because we're a part of the larger national group. So always for me, it's about finding new quilters. And every time I find one, it's like a hidden gem, a discovery. Because there's so few of us, each one is precious because there's so few. So finding each other, we find joy in that. And that camaraderie is special. So we're getting together here and presenting, and also the quilters have involved themselves in workshops with youth here in the Cincinnati area, Columbus, and the Dayton area. So that's important, that the women be involved in teaching.
For all of her accomplishments, it's no wonder Carolyn was one of the first recipients of the Ohio Heritage Fellowship Award, an award honoring Ohio's master folk artists who do work in their communities to make sure these traditions stay strong.
An Ohio Heritage Fellow is really a culture bearer, someone who advances the field of her particular art form, which in Carolyn's case is quilting, and does so by promoting it, by educating audiences about it, by discovering and encouraging new artists to come into the field.
My legacy is my art and the story of my people. My legacy is about trying to save an important art form within the national community. That art form is a dying art form that has always been very, very important within our culture. So the legacy is about preservation and presenting.
She's got a lot of great things even ahead of her, I think, because she's that good.
She has helped the African American community, in essence, by saving what was a dying art.
Not only does the quilting needle unite the women involved in the Women of Color Quilters Network, but I always say, as I travel the country, and I travel a lot, I've never met a stranger in the national quilt community. I don't care what race or what region of the country I'm in, I don't meet strangers in the quilt making community, because yes, we're all united through the thread of the needle. It's the art form that unites us, and we're not strangers. We're sisters in the spirit of the cloth.